Hey everybody, it's Scott Shetler here at Extreme Performance Training Systems, and welcome to this week's episode of Strength and Health TV. This week I want to talk about the importance of accessory exercises. Whether you're a lifter or an athlete, I think this is an area of training that is often overlooked. Now if we talk about the lifting in particular, or the lifters, for instance the ones that I train are mostly power lifters, and I guess this would apply to weightlifters as well. But you see a lot of things in the industry that pertains to powerlifting where you get some purists who think that the best way to progress in the lifts is just to train the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, or typically just focusing on what would be referred to as the classical lifts, the ones that you do in competition. And that by continuing to push those movements and perfect technique in those movements, the lifts will go up. And that does happen to a certain point, but what happens when the limiting factor is a specific muscle in the chain of muscles that's being used? For instance, in the squat, if your lower back is the limiting factor, then your lower back is going to limit the weight that you can lift. So if your legs are capable of squatting 500 pounds, but your lower back's only capable of supporting 400, you're going to be limited to 400 pounds. So by the idea that you just need to work on the classical lifts, then the idea there is that if you just keep squatting or working a certain percentage of your squat, your strength is going to go up, and that should take care of that weakness. But to me, a better way to train would be to, when that weakness is exposed, begin hitting that weakness, targeting that weakness with specific exercises developed to build up the strength in that muscle group. For the lower back, that could be things like back extensions, it could be things like reverse hyperextensions, stiff-legged deadlifts, or good mornings, exercises that focus more on a hip hinging type of movement that are going to put that lower back under stress. And you would do the same for other exercises. So I think it's important to have a large number of assistance exercises that you go to, that you rotate, and that will also prevent accommodation in those movements. For instance, if the only movement that you use for triceps was, say, like a barbell extension, and that's, you just keep working that and working that, eventually that exercise is not going to push up the triceps anymore, and you'll just be hammering that over and over and not making any progress, and it'll be that's when it's important to move on to another exercise. Now, for the people that I work with, we tend to vary our assistance exercises, sometimes week to week, sometimes workout to workout. That doesn't mean that we leave an area neglected. It just means that we focus on the primary weakness first, then we hit the rest of the movements. You get some people on the other side of the coin, from the purists who just want to work the classical lifts. They'll just say, well, everything's weak, so train everything. Well, yeah, that's great to a certain extent, but you have to prioritize the movements that you're working, because at the beginning of your workout, you're going to be strongest, and then as you fatigue, as you go through your workout, you're not going to be able to put as much into the movements. So I think the best way to plan your accessory exercises is to, after you do your main movement, again, this is talking about the lifters that we work with here, after you do your primary movement of the day, then move on to your weakest muscle group, and then the next weakest muscle group, and the next weakest muscle group, and you work your way down till you finish up with your strongest muscle group. So for instance, if we look at the bench press, the movements that assist the bench press are going to be the pecs, they're going to be the delts, they're going to be the lats, and they're going to be the triceps, are going to be the primary muscle groups that we're going to focus on. So if your triceps are the weak point in the bench press, after you do your primary bench exercise, typically what we'll do is we'll do a couple of sets, maybe 2 or 3 sets of something like, and now this is after we've already done our main bench press movement for the day. Then I'm going to move on to maybe dumbbell presses for a couple of sets of reps. Things that are going to give us a little bit more pec work, things that are going to support or supplement the primary movement, which is going to be a bench press or a variation of the bench press that we do on our bench days. So we might do some sort of dumbbell bench press, whether it's an incline, a flat, or a decline. We might do some sort of push-up. We're going to do some sort of pressing movement to supplement the primary movement of the day. Then after that, if your triceps are your weak point, you're going to move on to the triceps, and you're going to hit the triceps really, really hard, do a lot of volume for the triceps. then after you finish off your triceps, you're going to move on to the next weakest muscle group. Now, if you have a hard time keeping the bar in a good bar path, it might be your lats in your upper back that are not providing stability in your setup for the bench press. So then we're going to move on to the lats in the upper back. We're going to hit those really hard. Then we're going to finish up with the delts and then probably throw in some biceps. So you've got to be able to pick out your weak points, your weak muscle groups that are holding back the lift that you're trying to progress, and then you hit those first and then work your way down the chain. And these are going to rotate, you know, that's not always going to be the same. You know, after you work on your triceps for a while, if that was your primary weak point, you might find, you know, that it's your shoulders, you might find that it's your lats. In the squat, you know, you might find, you know, your lower back's giving you issues for a while, then pretty soon it's the hamstrings or the hips or the abs. So you've got to be able to identify, or your coach needs to be able to identify where you're breaking down in the specific lift that you're working on building, and then being able to apply the correct assistance exercises. And like I said, I think it's important to have a huge variety of assistance exercises, because once one stops working, you need to rotate to another one to constantly keep new stimulus on the muscles so that you're not accommodating to any one movement or any one training method. So that's typically how we're going to look at assistance exercises for the lifters in here. But assistance exercises, they're very important for other athletes as well. For instance, if you're a runner, if you're a sprinter, and you've got weak hamstrings, then you're going to want to make sure that you're focusing some special attention on the hamstrings when you're doing your strength and conditioning work. If it's your torso, if your abs are weak, if your lower back's weak, you need to make sure that you're hitting those movements. If you look at athletes like fighters, for instance, you know, they might need to do a lot of accessory work for their neck, maybe their grip. Football players, they might need to do a lot of work for their neck, for the lower back. I just had a defensive lineman that I worked with over the summer. He plays at a college down here in Georgia, and he came out of one of the dominant high school programs here in Georgia. And you know, all these guys are big, strong, they're good football players, they're good athletes. You know, I got him in here, and his lower back was weak as hell. It was unbelievable how weak his lower back was compared to everything else. You know, here's a guy he's a 500 squatter, and you know, his lower back was trashed after doing some rack pulls, after doing some reverse hypers. You know, he couldn't even do reverse hypers with 50% of his squat max for sets of 10 to 15. You know, his back was giving out on him. And the lower back is not an area you want to be weak when you're an athlete. You know, his neck was weak, so we had him doing a lot of neck work. When you look at the bulk of what they focused on, he was focusing on the front squat, the closed grip bench, and the power clean. And obviously that stuff wasn't working his lower back, because his lower back was a glaring weakness. But over a few months training over the summer, doing a lot of reverse hypers, doing some kettlebell swings, doing some various types of sled work, doing some glute ham raises, doing different types of deadlift exercises and various pulls and stuff like that, he was able to bring up his lower back strength tremendously. It's not only important for strength, but for injury prevention. So you have to be able to look at, if you're working with athletes, regardless of the sport, you've got to look at the muscles being used in the sport, the muscles being used in the position for that sport. You've got to be able to identify if the athlete has any imbalances, which you see a lot of in sports. I worked with a kicker who was playing at the arena league level, and you see a huge, you know, I mean, he's swinging his right leg across his body and kicking a ball for the bulk of his career. He had a big imbalance, you know, going across his abdominals and his torso. So you want to make sure that you're helping to prevent injury, but you're also not making that area too loose either. You don't want to totally stretch them out and get them totally balanced out to the point where, you know, there's not enough tension to provide, you know, the power development for the sporting movement also. So you've got to know how to implement and apply the assistance exercises to help prevent injury, to help offset muscular imbalances, but you also want to make sure that it's not going to inhibit the athlete's ability to perform their sporting form correctly. So it's you know, each athlete is its own case, and that's why I just have a hard time, you know, when I see these high school athletes and stuff like that who are part of a big strength program and stuff. The job of a strength coach is very difficult when you're working with large groups of athletes, because you can get the bulk of the stuff done, but when it comes to those individual things, the coach has to pay very special attention to make sure that each athlete is getting what they need to get stronger and to get better for their sport and their position. So I think if you want to go back to running really quick, you know, before we wrap up, if you read the great book Underground Secrets to Faster Running by Barry oh man, I can't think of Barry Ross. Barry presented presented a study in there. It was a study that was done. I think it was on 5K runners. I think it was like I think it was 5K, maybe 10K, but it was distance runners, not sprinters. And what they did was they took two groups in the study. One of them did their typical running training and running mileage. The other group reduced their running volume, the running distance, by I think 30%. So they took out 30% of the running training and implemented a strength training program in place of the part of their running training volume that they took out. So they didn't add the strength training on top of the regular running volume. They reduced the running volume and added strength training. At the end of the study, what they found was the group that reduced their actual running yet implemented a strength and conditioning, a heavy strength training program, they had made improvements, greater improvements in their 5K times, their run times, because of increased force production, increased ground contact forces. So, here's a good example of a group of athletes who just tried to perfect their sporting form, and then the other group that supplemented their sport training with a good strength training program, and they made greater results. They didn't get better because they increased their VO2 max. They got better because they improved their force production. So, and that had a big carryover to distance runners. So again, you've got to look at each athlete like its own individual puzzle and be able to identify what they're lacking in and the assistance movements and the supplementary exercises to help raise their level of performance. So, going back to this idea of accessory work and assistance exercises, it is what it says. They're to assist the sport. So if your sport is weightlifting or powerlifting, the assistance work that you do is designed to build up the primary lifts. If you're an athlete, you're going to use weight training, strength and conditioning, various training modalities that are general, they're not specific modalities. So it's not, if you're a runner, it's not just going out and doing more running, but it's using things like strength training, mobility, flexibility if need be, other types of training modalities to assist what you're doing. You can't just get better by continuing to run and run and run. If you're a fighter, you can't just fight. You've got to bring in other forms of training to help build up the primary sporting form and keep you from regressing. So hopefully you enjoyed this week's video. Hopefully it gets you thinking a little bit more about the notion of assistance and supplementary exercises and what you can do regardless of your sport, your discipline, or whatever it is that you compete in, to help improve your results by adding the necessary assistance work to your program. So always analyze what it is that you're doing, analyze your technique, analyze your sport, analyze, if you're a power lifter, analyze your squat, your bench, and your deadlift, and look for those weak areas and then apply the correct things to help build up those weak areas and hopefully get you to better gains and increased sporting performance. So hopefully you like this week's video. Hopefully it spurs on a little bit of creative thinking, with your own programming. And if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below this video. And until next time, stay strong and stay healthy.